Welcome to Brain Tumor Talk, a podcast brought to you by the Ivy Brain Tumor Center at Barrow Neurological Institute. This show unites leading experts, inspiring survivors, and compassionate caregivers in conversations about the latest in research and treatment. Together, we share stories filled with challenges and hope. I am your host, Michelle Palacino, a member of the Ivy Center team. My deep understanding of brain cancer comes from both my professional insights and personal experience as the daughter of a brain cancer patient. Brain Tumor Talk is your invitation to connect, learn, and find support in this community. The information shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing stated on this podcast should be considered medical advice. Welcome to Brain Tumor Talk. I'm your host, Michelle Palacino. We've got a special episode today. It's Glioblastoma Awareness Day, recognized annually on the third Wednesday of July. This day is dedicated to raising awareness of glioblastoma, the most common and aggressive form of brain cancer. On today's episode, we have a special group of guests. We have Carol Stevens, Amber Jackson, Heather Nees. All have been impacted by glioblastoma in some way. Thank you so much for being here, ladies. I'm hoping that we can start this episode off with maybe a brief introduction of who you guys are and how your stories with glioblastoma began. Carol, can you kick us off?
I'm Carol Stevens, and I found out that I had a tumor about a little over a year ago. I started having problems with peripheral vision and went and saw my eye doctor. They said everything was fine with my eyes. So I went and had a MRI done, and they called me about 20 minutes after I got home from the MRI and told me that I had a tumor. So that's where our journey began, and ended up in the emergency room, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 weeks later. I didn't even meet Dr. Sinai before he did my first surgery, and got the tumor out.
So this was your primary care physician that caught this?
Actually, it was my husband who first noticed it with the peripheral vision.
Yeah.
And then after I saw my eye doctor, I went and saw my primary care, and they sent me for the MRI.
Oh my gosh, your husband is so observant.
He is very observant.
Good job.
Yeah. Yeah. He had a coworker whose wife had a glioblastoma as well, and that's how hers presented itself, was same as mine, peripheral vision loss.
Really?
So that was the first thing he said, and jokingly, he's like, well, you might have a brain tumor, and here we are.
We always say it as a joke, and then it comes to fruition, and then you think you manifested it. I'm convinced of something like that. I'm like, that's amazing.
Know that, like, God put that man that had a wife, and so we made the connection.
Yeah.
It's not coincidence.
No, that's incredible. Pretty crazy. And so we were lucky that we got on it right away then after that. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
And so you're still in treatment right now?
I am, yes.
Yeah.
With the clinical trial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Amber, your story started with your husband, Tim.
Yes, my husband. February of 2021, he had a seizure at work. And that was when they did a CT and found the tumor. And he was at the Ivy Brain Tumor Center and fought for 16 months. And he passed away in June of 2022.
I feel like that's a lot of times how it presents itself, is a seizure.
Yeah, he had no other. Looking back, we kind of thought he was a little fog-brained at times, had some headaches, but it was still when COVID was happening, and he was a nurse and he was working like 60, 70-hour weeks.
Yeah.
We had just had our fourth baby. He was a month old. So we honestly thought he was just overworked and tired and lack of sleep. And then when he had a seizure is when we were like, maybe that wasn't black.
Yeah. And then Heather, yours presented when you were really young.
Yeah, I was 24 and I was leaving work, and all of a sudden I couldn't understand what the lines meant in the road, like a solid yellow line versus a dashed white line. And I immediately panicked and pulled over and called my mom, and I explained it to her, and she kind of almost laughed, like, what do you mean? You know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I said, I don't know, but I'm too intimidated to drive. Mm-hmm. And I was working for a doctor at the time, and he sent me to an internist, and almost like Carol, sent me right away for an MRI within 48 hours. And I was told I had a brain tumor.
I don't know if you guys know this about me, but my mom was diagnosed with glioblastoma. And it was a similar situation actually to how Tim presented. It was a seizure, but she was setting the table at dinner and kept putting like the same item on the table. And we're like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, it was
so wild. And never in my wildest dreams, and I worked at the Ivy Brain Tumor Center, never in my wildest dreams did I think that this was a brain tumor. I was like, it's a stroke. Right away, you think of like all the other things that it could be. So you would think, I mean, I'm always convinced, I'm like, when's my tumor coming? Because I work and I'm surrounded by all these patients and caregivers. And so it came out of left field for us. And so, when we're talking about like the shock that comes with it, what was your guys' initial reaction when you heard the diagnosis?
Definitely shock, like a punch in the gut.
Almost denial for a little bit. Still,
sure.
It was still like, no, this doesn't happen to us. They must have had something wrong. We're going to find out later on that it was something else.
Yeah, I remember just feeling like the wind was just sucked out of my lungs.
Yeah.
Like, I literally could not believe that was my scan. Yeah. And there was a tumor that large in my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How large was your tumor?
My first one was about the size of a large lime.
Oh my gosh, where was it located?
Over here, it was hitting occipital, parietal, and temporal. 3 lobes. Yep.
Wow. And then, so your first one was it an oligo?
Astrocytoma glioma grade 2.
And then you had a recurrent.
I did. Just shy of a year after they did the craniotomy.
Yeah.
I had flare signals in my MRI.
Oh, and that's how they detected it. Yeah. And then Carol, yours, you ended up also having
A recurrence, yeah.
after.
It was about, it was in November. So my first surgery was in the end of April, and that was in November. So it was right after I got done doing all of the radiation, and I was doing the temozolomide standard care, right? Mm-hmm. And they thought everything, for my tumor and everything looked like standard of care would work on it. And then it came back, and that's how we got to the clinical trial.
Thank you for sharing that. But Amber, I wanted to talk to you about Tim's experience with the clinical trial as well, and what prompted you to join a clinical trial. Yeah, so we decided right away to join the clinical trial when he was diagnosed. We went to his general oncologist, and he had said, I can help you with the standard of care, but these are the statistics, and it didn't quite look too good. And he said, I really think with his age and how healthy he was otherwise, that he would do a lot better with a clinical trial. And so he put us in contact with Dr. Sinai at Barrow, and we were able to jump right into a phase 0 clinical trial for newly diagnosed glioblastoma. And the way that Tim and I looked at it was, Tim had such a good mindset about it, and he thought if it doesn't do much to help him, then hopefully the data that they'll be able to get from the clinical trial will help those down the line. So that was kind of our mindset going into it, was that we hoped that this new drug would do something for Tim, but if not, it at least would help other people down the line. Yeah, I remember Tim was so selfless and positive, and throughout his journey, he was truly like one of the most phenomenal people I've seen come through. He was really something special.
He was a gem.
Yeah, he was. Now, Heather.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about yours, because you were diagnosed when, in 2004?
Yeah. There was no options. I actually found out through Barrow that there were some clinical trials going on for low-grade gliomas, and I could try to qualify. I found one at Duke. So I flew out to Duke 4 times. I was approved. What we didn't know is that my tumor had already become a GBM. So we were treating a low-grade glioma. But like you said, I gave back. That happened for a reason, because now they knew that this drug combination did not work for higher grade gliomas. And so even though it didn't work, it grew 37% while I was on it. At least they knew, the science was there to help them. And I just think it's amazing now because of, like centers like Ivy Brain Tumor Center, there's so many more options. They do testers for markers now, these phase 0, that was not around. That did not exist.
Yeah. So when you were on this trial, it was growing. You realized it wasn't working.
Right.
So you ended up having to have a second surgery.
Emergency brain surgery.
Yeah.
Yep.
And did you have that at Barrow?
I did. Dr. Robert Svetzler did my second surgery again.
Oh.
Yeah, amazing. Not just once, but twice.
Yeah.
And he told me at that time it had grown to a quarter of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
If he removed all of it, my left side would be paralyzed. And I asked him if there was anything he could do to, keep my left side functioning. And his last words were, I'll do my best. And when I woke up, I could use my left, but 20% of the tumor was left. And that's when they gave me 6 months to live, because they said, Right now, even with standard of care, you have 20% of a GBM4 left in your head, and there's really no chance.
So did you do radiation or chemotherapy?
I did exactly what you did, actually. The standard of care was temozolomide, along with radiation, 6 weeks. And we didn't really see anything happening until the bitter end. And it started slowly digressing in size on the MRIs. And I wound up being on chemo for a total of 3 years.
Wow. Yeah. Now, they always say that glioblastoma is the most common and aggressive form of brain cancer. It doesn't feel very common because until you get it, once you get it, then everybody becomes aware, but they'd never heard of it before. And so I have a question when it comes to how did you guys, when you first got this diagnosis, how did you manage the overwhelming amount of information that you end up getting? I will criticize myself here, and I went straight to WebMD. I was like, this is...
Google, we're all going to die.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I was like, this is not good,
We didn't.
You didn't?
We didn't.
Good for you.
No.
Did yourself
Part
a
of it,
favor.
I think, is because I had breast cancer as well. And one of my first surgeons from that cancer said, take it one step at a time. Don't go out and research everything on your own. That's what we're here for. We're experts. Let us do that. And we'll help you along the way, and take it one step at a time. Otherwise, you get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So we really didn't. It wasn't until recently that I started looking things up and finding out more details on things.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, good for you.
Because everybody's story, I always think back to Sinai says this. He's like, there are statistics out there and we can all find them, but every case is different.
And that's exactly what I keep telling people. I'm like, we're all different.
Yeah.
We might have the same type of a tumor to start with, but it's different for everybody. And those statistics aren't always right. I mean, you're a great example of it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So 18 months or 12 months or whatever, and 20 years, come on.
Yeah.
So they're out there. And so you can't let those statistics get to you. You can't look at that stuff, and we let the experts guide us along the way. They do this every day.
Yeah.
That was one thing that I loved, that Dr. Sinai, our first meeting with him was a couple weeks after Tim was diagnosed. And he was very we've got you. Let me take care. Let me worry about the statistic, and you guys just worry about your little family. And that was a mind shift for our family.
Yeah.
We'll let him worry about the statistic. They will worry about us.
Yeah.
Yeah. My sister took it on. She said, you stay away from the computer. This is my job as your sister. I'm going to navigate. She's the one that found the clinical trials. She's the one that found a lot of stuff for me. She's like, I don't want you on there. So very blessed to say that she took on that task.
So when you were discussing treatment options and things, it is a difficult diagnosis, no matter what, whether you Google or you don't, it's tough. It's tough. And so there's a lot of people involved in the decision making. So how did you manage? Was it you and your sister? Was it you and your whole family? You were, 25?
Yeah. I mean, you don't think of yourself as a kid when you're 24, but now that I'm, 44, I'm like, yeah, I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I really relied on those closest to me. And I'm very blessed to say I had an awesome support system, and we just navigated the best possible options that we could with what information we had. And I really relied on them to help me. But ultimately, they wanted me to make the decision because they said, you have to believe in it. If we believe in it and you don't, then there's no chance. Right. So ultimately, they would, guide me. And then I made the decision on what I thought was best for me.
Yeah. And then Amber and Carol, what were some of the most important factors that you guys are factoring in when you were approaching a care plan?
I think for Tim and I, it was a lot of quality of life, because for a while he was able to continue with treatment, but then it got to a point near the end where it was just really hard on him. And you could tell it was hard on him physically, it was hard on him mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And so that was the big thing, which is kind of our decision at the end, where he was just like, I don't want to live out my remaining days. We could tell this is going to end, we were towards the end, we knew it. And so he was just like, I don't want to be on any drugs anymore. I just don't want to do this. I want to be able to enjoy my kids. Our youngest, when he passed away, was only 17 months old. So he was like, I just want to be able to hold my kids and just play with them and not be stuck in bed the whole time. So that was kind of his quality of life was a big factor for us as well. So
it's the same with us. Quality of life is definitely the most important, I think.
Yeah. And you have Brian, your husband, who's, he's really the backbone of
Yes.
this
was discovered. So,
Yes.
do you guys approach, I remember like when we were going through this, it was like a lot of cooks in the kitchen because my mom and I were both very controlling. So I wanted to like take over everything. I was like, just let me do everything. My mom was like, no, like I need to, and then my dad and my brother and our doctors and everything like that. But you mentioned that, they are experts. So at what point do you kind of factor in like what the experts are saying versus what's best for you, especially given that you've gone through treatment before?
We listened to what they had to say. We trusted what they had to say because, it's not even just one person. They go and talk to the tumor board as well, right? So it's a whole group of people talking about whatever their plan is, what they think you should try and what their suggestions are. But ultimately, they leave the decision up to you. And we just really looked at what it would mean to our life. And that's one of the reasons, like we looked at the Optune thing and just went, that's just such a drastic measure to take that we weren't willing to go there yet. I'm not saying that we won't at some point, but at this point, this is working for us. The side effects of this trial aren't that bad. So I'm able to still, I work, I'm working full time.
That's incredible. It's amazing. Yeah, that really is. And so I'm looking at you three ladies, and I think all of you guys are at such different places in the diagnosis, or just in the experience in general. And so I want to know, like, how has your mindset shifted from when you were first diagnosed? Heather, I'll kick it off with you.
For me, once I realized that I had beat the odds, I immediately shifted into, I need to give others hope. That's my purpose. I know I am here to make sure others know you can beat this, and I want to inspire and encourage others. So I did my best with the help of Bear going public with my story because I wanted to reach as many people as I could to let them know you can defy the odds. You don't have to be a statistic. And I wanted to I just thought if there was one person I could have talked to during that time that had beat it, the hope it would have given me. And so that's what I do now. I'm constantly outreaching to make sure people know that they have me as a resource, whether it's just to say, did you have this? Did you go through that? The weird things that happen that come along with the treatments and surgeries. So I shifted from patient to almost caregiver just to help.
And we do go to the Gray Matters Foundation support group with Barrows. I find that helps a lot. Yeah. I know at first we were skeptical, going there, but it really does help because there's other people that are going through what you're going through, and a lot of them have the same type of tumor. So you get to hear experiences and see people like you that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years with a GBM.
Yeah. Now you've gone through multiple diagnoses and you're really in the thick of the journey right now.
Yes.
When you look back from when you first started, what would you say to patients and caregivers who are going through this and kind of like how your perspective has shifted?
I would say that you have to take it one step at a time, knowing that they come up with new things all the time. So don't lose hope and let other people help you along the way. I know that was one of the hardest things for us. Letting people, help us. Friends would want to come and drive me to radiation appointments, but they live across town. And I was like, that's such a hard thing for you guys to come all the way to my house to get me to take me there. And they're like, Carol, we want to do it.
Yeah.
Let us do it.
And one thing someone said to me is this, I don't know how to help, and this is what I can do to help. So please let me. And that was a shift for us of like, people don't know what to do to help. And we don't even know what to do to let people help. But when they say like, this is all I know how to do, let me drive across town to take you to radiation. Okay.
Yeah. We were in the same situation of like, we didn't even know what to ask for. You don't even know what you don't know, And I remember like thinking like people brought over food to our house. And I remember being like, oh my God, we haven't eaten all day. Yeah. Like, and it was just such a weight lifted. But then it's like, you don't want to inconvenience everybody. You don't want to be a burden, like you don't want all these things. And you also don't want to ask. I remember not wanting to ask anybody for help. I was like, my brother and I, other than my brother, who was our savior, during all of this, he really stepped up. But the two of us, I was like, we can just do all of this on our own. And it's really not the case. Like it takes a village to do this. It really takes friends and
like coworkers, and it's always like the people that you really least expect come out of the woodwork, and they are just so, I just have like eternal gratitude for a lot of the people that showed up for my family and I. But Amber, I know you always have great advice when it comes to perspective.
I think our perspective really shifted into, we just enjoyed the heck out of the time that we had. You know, very early on in his diagnosis, we didn't know that it was going to go that quickly. We had really hoped for years and everything. And, but as time went on and his tumor got worse, we really were just like, we just need to enjoy each other so much. And that's like the perspective that we had. And then even myself moving forward after he's passed away, I know the tumor had grown maybe about 7 or 8 months in. And so he was needing another surgery. And I had actually planned a surprise trip to Canada for him for his birthday. And this trip was supposed to take place about 2 weeks after his surgery. And so I was like, well, we're not going to be able to go. He doesn't know. I'll just cancel it. And in talking to Dr. Sinai and his nurse practitioner, the nurse practitioner said, take him. What are we fighting for if he doesn't get to live? And that completely changed our whole perspective in the rest of his treatment, and even mine moving forward after he's passed away, of what are we fighting for if we don't live?
Exactly.
And so that for us in the remaining of his treatment is we just really tried to enjoy, we just held each other tighter, and we loved each other better, and even our relationships with other people, you know.
Yeah, it's a gift.
Yeah.
It really is a gift that you just want to pass on to others without having to give them a disease.
You're right.
It's so true. And I get people all the time that ask me now, you know, it's been 2 years, like, how is it that you were able to smile so much? And I'm like, I'm alive.
Yeah.
Like, it's beautiful.
Exactly.
And I get to live with the knowledge of who Tim was in my life, and everyone just loved him, you know, to where I'm like, he's mine and I get to keep him.
Yeah.
You know, he's part of our legacy.
Yeah. I resonate so much with the, what are we doing this for if we're not living?
Yeah.
I remember we did the same thing with my mom. We took like 3 trips, you know, that year, which was like more than we'd really taken like in a year. And so, especially like after COVID and everything. And so my brother was really adamant about like, what are we doing all this for if we're not doing it to live?
Yeah.
And I remember like keeping that kind of mindset, and same with Dr. Sinai and Jackie Garcia, who was the nurse educator at the Ivy Center. She was like, no, like, she was like, come on, you got to take some trips.
Yeah.
Like, we are doing this to like do things, you know? And so, you know, one thing I will say, Amber, is you do have a unique perspective coming at this from a caregiver. Yeah. It's an emotional landscape. Yeah. It really is. How did you navigate the journey, and how did you navigate your own anxiety, and what kind of advice would you give? I mean, I could ask you 1,000 questions, but what kind of advice would you give to the other caregivers who are listening?
I feel like so much. It was hard because Tim was my person that I went to when I emotionally needed help. So in the beginning, I didn't want him to know how much I was struggling, because he felt like it was his fault and things like that. And he was also processing a lot of how he was feeling. And then it got to the point where he mentally just couldn't comprehend it. He couldn't take that on. He was having a hard time understanding simple parts of conversations. And so I knew he wasn't a person I could go to anymore, which was really, really hard, having your husband, who was so smart and so witty and so strong, his mind just slowly go. I got into therapy. I'm a huge advocate for therapy. I actually have a therapy session later on today.
Oh, it's not this session.
No, it's not this. This is therapy. And then I go to my own therapy, where I still, 2.5, 3 years later, I still go to therapy, and it's huge. And I relied a lot on family and friends. And that's another way that people want to help. And I would just talk to them about it. And I realized how important it was for me to receive that help, even if it was professional help or just family and friends. To then be able to carry that load with both of us. So I think that speaks along the lines of, don't be afraid to ask for help, especially professional help when you need it, because there's nothing wrong with that. And that completely helped me be able to carry that load the rest of the time.
I will say, you guys are the blessing. It's hard going through it, but we couldn't do it without you. My mom was my number one, and there's no way in this world. So
I agree.
Thank you. Yeah. You guys are doing the hard work.
Honestly, I have said it many times that I think that it's harder for them than it is
I totally
for us.
agree. I totally agree with
be
that.
on the medication and doing the surgeries and whatever, but I think it's harder on
it is.
the caregivers.
It's way harder. You guys are watching your loved one go through it. We're just going through it. But you're watching it. And I give more and more credit every day to my mother and to other caregivers out there who are just supporting that one they love and want to survive, and doing anything they can to make it happen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Heather, I've heard the term survivor's guilt.
Over and over and over again. Because as you know, I mean, I said I help those that get diagnosed, and sometimes the statistic they win. And every time I lose someone that I had been helping, I feel terrible. And I know I shouldn't. It's not my fault that I'm living, and I did what I could for them while they were here. But I break a little bit of me dies when I lose someone to a GBM, because it's really hard.
Yeah.
Knowing that you're one of the lone survivors. And
Yeah. Can only imagine.
Yep.
Yeah. I will say, I want to jump back for a second. You know, as a caregiver too, I know my mom struggled with guilt. She always said, kind of like what you guys were saying, that it's harder for my dad, my brother, and I to watch than like what she was going through. But I will say this was never a burden. This was never a burden for any of us. It was an honor and it was a privilege to help my mom get this. You know, like life gives you the cards that you're dealt, and you have to play what you're dealt. And I think that it was a gift that I'll carry with me forever. And so I get that there is guilt that comes with this, but never once did I think that this was a burden. Never. And I always think, like, if you can show up, if the patients can show up, the caregivers can show up.
Yeah.
Like I was like, my mom had a smile on her face throughout the whole thing. And I was like, will you just
Be sick.
Yeah, like I was, you know, and she was so optimistic. And I'm like, if she can do this, then my brother, me, my dad, all of us, we can do this.
Yeah.
You know, it was a team effort through and through, from the beginning to all the way through. So that brings me to you, Carol, is that, you know, a lot of the patients that are listening to this podcast are newly diagnosed and they are going through this. And so, you know, what would you say to the patients, right? Like what kind of advice would you give to them?
I would say that you have to stay positive, take it one step at a time, look to your support groups, and I mean, not just a group in general, but all of your family, your friends. I lean on my friends a lot. Mm-hmm. They take me out, make sure I am having quality of life.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know?
Good.
Yeah.
They are my therapy.
Yeah, good.
Going and hanging out with them. Live life, for sure. Live life.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that, you know, we all kind of touched upon like this diagnosis, really, it just sucks the wind right out of you. And I want to ask, across the board, what was the thing that surprised you the most when it came to this disease? That if somebody's listening to this, they would be like, oh, yes, that was like, you know, that really surprised me. Or maybe it was a deficit. Maybe it was perspective. Maybe it was something else. What was the thing that really surprised you?
People showing up. I just, the people that you even touched on that come out of the woodworks that you didn't know were going to be there when times got hard. And sadly, those who couldn't be there for you.
Yeah.
That's almost as shocking as the people you thought, oh, they'll definitely be there for me if something goes wrong. Mm-hmm. They are not there. And then the people that show up who you didn't even realize would be an awesome support system.
Yeah.
So
I have people that have now become my best friends.
Right.
Because they showed up.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
You know.
And some aren't now because they didn't show up. So you learn really quick who's really going to be there for you when things get hard.
Yeah.
I think this is going to sound so silly that it was so surprising to me because it's brain tumor and the deficits, but that was how quickly his mind went. You know, he was so kind and so loving still throughout the whole thing, but how quickly he was unable to process just simple, like I had said, just simple parts of conversation. Or if I was able to say, like, do you want to do this or that first? And he just couldn't even think of, like, I don't know what you're asking me to do. So how quickly I had to take on the burden of, well, we said it wasn't a burden. It wasn't a burden, but it did feel like a burden sometimes of like the bills and, you know, just, you know, yeah. And it's just stuff that we just did so well together that it now was like, oh, you physically or mentally can't even process this.
Right.
You know, caring for him was never the burden. It was always like battling with the insurance that felt like the burden.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I relate to that on a really different level, is the how fragile the mind really is.
Yes, I think maybe that's what I was trying to say.
It's such a delicate puzzle that if something's even slightly wrong, I remember at one point, things even like brushing your teeth, right? Putting toothpaste on the brush and then not knowing what to do with the brush. And it's a test of patience, and it's just, the whole thing is so, it does give you a deeper appreciation of, the mind.
Yeah.
But like saying something and having it like not compute the way you thought it was going to, or things like that were really changes that I had to adapt to.
Yeah.
And they were challenges, but
Yeah, I think Dr. Spetzer put it really nicely. It's like real estate up there. And some of it's really precious and some of it's not worth a whole lot.
Yeah.
And I'm missing a quarter of my brain. Most of mine wasn't worth a whole lot. It's all about where it is.
Yeah.
You can have a
100%.
tiny pea size that could basically kill you versus massive that you could live with. It's very unusual, the brain.
yeah.
It is. And it adapts so much too.
It is, yeah.
It's amazing. It also surprises me what they can do surgery wise.
Oh, man.
And how technical and it's advanced so much, right? That they can go in there and you can come out of it without all of the deficits because they can plan so much ahead.
Right. Yeah.
They had Tim take a drug. I wish I remembered what it was, but where he took a drug before surgery and then they got in there and they were able to turn off the lights and turn on a black light and it glowed. And I was amazed by that.
Yeah,
I'm like,
it's
no,
called ALA.
thank you. Yeah, like technology and just science these days. I was blown away. I was like, I'm sorry, you want him to do what?
Yeah.
But it was amazing to me that the things that they could do.
Yeah.
And the mapping of the motor skills
Yes.
and things so they know where not to touch
Not to
before they go in there.
Exactly.
Even. They took hours to do the mapping of motor skills and things and marking things in their
Crazy.
stuff. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, I always think what's wild is the awake craniotomies, where the patient's talking and they're, it's in a delicate area and they don't want to impact speech or, I'm always astonished at these. I mean, they're heroes. They're like heroes that don't
Absolutely.
wear capes.
Literally, they are
Absolutely.
superhuman,
I
for
remember
sure.
before surgery, Tim just thanking them so much. Like, thank you for going to school for all of this. Thank you for consecrating so much of your time and your energy. And for me, he was like, why me? Like, of all people, but just that they just dedicate so much of their lives to help other people. It was amazing.
Yeah, it really is astounding. And so, to wrap up this episode, I want to ask you guys, all of you guys have made such a point of bringing awareness to this disease in various forms. You guys have all shared your stories, and we're so grateful for everything, all of the awareness that you've brought. But on Glioblastoma Awareness Day, I want to ask you, why do you feel that it's so important to spread awareness and bring awareness to this?
Without awareness, they won't find a cure. So we have, there will be no change, you're right. So I think the more we're vocal about it, the more people hear about it and realize there's a great need to continue research to finding a cure, because it's not a very positive outlook once you get diagnosed with
And
this.
I think also to bring hope to everybody.
Yes.
Your fight is not alone. You
Right.
have a whole group of people and a lot of people that'll help you along the way. So there's hope and you're not alone.
You echo those?
I do. It's just so beautiful. Yeah. And that life is just so precious and beautiful. And
Yeah. Well, I will say thank you, ladies, so much for being here and for doing this with us today. It's really an honor to sit across the seats from you. So thank you, ladies, so much for being here. We hope this episode has informed and inspired you. Subscribe to Brain Tumor Talk so you don't miss another episode, and please consider leaving us a review to help others in the brain tumor community find us.